Good afternoon, everyone. It's me again. Thank you so much for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma for our monthly webinar series. I'm Asia Mukes, Project Development Manager, and we are excited about the 2019-2020 season of our monthly webinar. Our hope is that we continue the conference's tradition of working to improve racial and ethnic relations on college campuses by providing virtual learning opportunities. This season is sure to be amazing. We have a lineup of scholars who will cover a wide range of issues, including immigration and DACA, institution reform and planning, and critical pedagogy. Next month, on November 20th, Christina Marshall from Baker College will present Race, Immigration, and Fake News and discuss how the proliferation of alternative facts racializes immigrants and creates a false narrative of their economic, social, educational, religious, technological, and cultural contributions. The cost is $25 and registration is still open. For those of you just joining us, this season we've introduced a new student track that focuses on ideas that speak directly to the experiences of students and is either facilitated or co-facilitated by a student. They're intended to identify emerging scholars and connect students in the NCORE community to each other. These sessions are held the first Wednesday of the month and always available at no cost. On December 4th, Lily Gonzalez from California State University Northridge will be presenting A Revolutionary Scholar's Approach, a student guide into organizing formerly incarcerated students in higher education with an abolition proxies. Make sure you're live posting. I say this every month. We want to know where you're watching. So tweet, Instagram, and Facebook pictures from your office. I've actually done a hashtag search and the pictures are really cool. Use the hashtag NCORE and the hashtag start the conversation online. You may end up in a very special NCORE video. Today we have Dr. Sara Beth Dempsey, Legacy Lee, Angela Rascon, Rachel Fuller, and Sihin Tsegay from St. Mary's College of California. Together, they will be discussing an innovative course designed to train undergraduate students to lead peer dialogues on isms. The center is grateful for their expertise. I am going to invite them back.
Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to Discovering Common Ground Across Difference, an innovative course on facilitating difficult conversations. We'd like to start by acknowledging the land on which we sit and occupy today as a traditional and ancestral home of the Chochenyo and Ohlone peoples. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this dialogue. We take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of this land. Also, we'd like to share that it's the expectation of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies that all participants at NCORE enjoy a welcoming and inclusive environment, free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. NCORE is committed to fostering an atmosphere that encourages the free expression and exchange of ideas. In pursuit of that ideal, NCORE is committed to the promotion of equality of opportunity and treatment for all NCORE participants in NCORE-sponsored events, regardless of gender, gender identity or expression, race, color, national ethnic origin, religion or religious belief, age, marital status, sexual orientation, immigration status, disabilities, veteran status, or body size. Good afternoon, my name is Legacy Lee. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the director of the Intercultural Center here at St. Mary's College of California.
Hi, I'm Sara Beth Dempsey. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Associate Director for Community Engagement at the Catholic Institute for Lasallian Social Action, or SILSA, which is our community engagement and social justice office on campus.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sihin Tsegay. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a fourth year here at St. Mary's, and I'm also a psychology major.
Hello all, my name is Anka Rascon. I am a second year student, Spanish culture and ethnic studies double major. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hello, my name is Rachel Fuller. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a fourth year transfer student and a psychology major at St. Mary's.
Before we start today, we would like to dedicate this session to Corliss Watkins, known affectionately on our campus as Mama Corliss, who unfortunately passed away in the summer of 2018. Corliss had several important roles on this campus. She was the director of the Student Engagement and Academic Success Office, an advisor for the Black Student Union, the interim director for the High Potential Program, and instructor for many years of the Jan Term course, including the first instructor that I co-instructed this class with several years ago. So Mama Corliss, this one's for you.
On the agenda for today, we have 4 different parts. We're going to start with an overview of the course, and then we're going to go into a sample of the student workshop, which will be on whiteness, and that will be a sample of what students in the class would actually be doing. And then after that, we'll have some assessment data analysis where you will get to see some of the stats that we've chosen that best represent our course. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end.
We have 3 learning outcomes for you today. The first is to model an effective peer facilitator course that prepares undergraduate students with intergroup dialogue, presentation, workshop facilitation skills. The second is to have our students, Angela and Rachel, share their new knowledge and skills by facilitating the sample workshop for you. And the third is to have all of you ask questions of us to explore how you can design a similar program at your home campus.
We'd like to start by telling you a little bit about our beautiful campus. And you can see this image here, this aerial shot of our campus, kind of nestled into the hills of Moraga. It's a visually beautiful campus, great place to take a walk around. A little bit about our campus. We were established in 1863. We're a private liberal arts Lasallian Roman Catholic college. We're located in Moraga, California. You may not know where that is, but that's about 8 miles from Oakland. Which is also next to Berkeley, across the water from San Francisco. So we're not too far from a lot of well-known cities, but we're kind of tucked away. We have a lot of undergraduate majors, as you can see, several master's programs and 1 doctoral program. We have 216 full-time faculty, so our student faculty ratio is 11:1, our average class size is about 19. So very small college, small intimate classes where students get to know their faculty well. And most importantly for this presentation, our academic calendar, between the fall and the spring semester, we have a middle term, which is called Jan Term. And that's a 4-week term. And that during that 4 weeks is when the class we'll be talking about today operates. So a lot happens during those 4 weeks, and we're going to kind of spell out for you what we do and how that all plays out. One thing to notice about our campus is that we do have some core principles that align pretty closely with the vision, the mission, and the learning outcomes of this class, right? So we have faith in the presence of God and quality education, but most importantly, the 3 that we've bolded for you here: concern for the poor and social justice, inclusive community, and respect for all persons, are ones that align directly with the class that we'll be talking about today. And in that way, if you're thinking about maybe implementing a course similarly on your campus, you can see that if you have similar kind of values and principles that are working for you on your campus, it might be easier to get a course like this approved and to get that kind of continual support that we've had on this campus.
Yeah, so as Legacy mentioned, we're a fairly small campus, about 3,700 students. There are traditional students, undergraduate age students, with 2,675 undergraduates. We have more females than males. Also, in looking at demographics, 42% of our student body is white, and we are a Hispanic serving institution with 29% of our students identifying as Latinx, followed by 17% who are Asian, 5% African American and Black, 1% Asian, or excuse me, Hawaiian Pacific Islander, 3% international, and 3% either didn't report or their other ethnicities.
We would like to give you a little bit of background on how this course came about. So back in 2007, 2010, in that time frame, WASC, or the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, who gives us our accreditation, came and looked at our campus and noticed some concerns around diversity and civility in our campus climate. And when we got that report, the campus was pretty appalled and wanted to make some changes. So some of the things that happened on this campus were the Faculty Senate started to create different workshops for staff and faculty to attend. So those are mandatory to go through every couple of years. We're currently in the process with a new senior diversity officer on campus of kind of re-implementing, redesigning some of those workshops, creating 2 tiers of those, and trying to get staff and faculty recommitted to that process. So that's something that happened on campus. In addition, we revamped our bias incident reporting team, or our tool, our BERT as we call it. And that's a place where people can anonymously post online things that they've witnessed, seen, or heard on campus that might be bias related. And I sit on that team, and that's a group of people that looks at those incidents, try to determine what's going on our campus, and thinks about how we might need to deal with some of those issues. In 2009, the first version of this Jan term course came about. It was called Intergroup Dialogue Program, Facilitator Training. At the time, that was the title. And the main purpose of that class was to try to create some trained students on campus who could lead different workshops around difficult dialogues or difficult issues. So later we'll be talking about kind of the makeup of the class, who's allowed to enroll, who we kind of hold spaces for, who we don't want to kind of overload the class. And part of that is they didn't want too many seniors in the class because they wanted students to be able to continue to stay on campus and do the work and kind of make an impact on campus. Another thing that might be of note is in 2012, the Intercultural Center where I work hired an assistant director, which was my former role. And that person was here to kind of institute an intergroup dialogue program called Connect in our first year residence halls. And so that program was trying to be tied to the types of work that was happening on campus around dealing with bias or incivility and trying to create a campus where we were talking about these difficult subjects. A couple things you might want to notice if we were to have our syllabus in front of you and you look at our course description, here's some keywords you can kind of understand what our course is all about. So our course is designed to prepare students to create components for and facilitate peer workshops on difficult dialogue topics. And that could be varied year to year. We might choose different isms, but we definitely always talk about sexism, racism, ableism, classism. Some of the major isms are always there. And we want them to be able to kind of create workshops for their peers on those. Secondly, students who complete this workshop will be equipped with practical, experiential, hands-on training and skills to challenge prejudice and discrimination. So they're getting a lot of experience doing this work, and we'll shortly outline how that works in our class. But once they're kind of dealing with that material, over and over, it becomes easier for them to think about doing the same thing back at home or with friends or in student organization spaces. We also focus on appreciating value and learning across difference. And so we really focus on everyone being a part of diversity, everyone bringing something to the table, and everyone bringing identity, a background, and experience that's unique, and all voices mattering in that space. And the skills learned in the class will enable us to live and work successfully and civilly in a diverse world. So we try to talk about, what do you want to do in the future? What are the things that you might want to be involved in, or how you want to make an impact in the world, and how will this class really help you? And we try to be really hands-on in that way. Our course motto is listen not to respond, but to understand. And I think that's really important as you go through and see what we talk about and what we do in this class is we're trying to train students not to be in a space of hearing someone expressing an experience they haven't had or an opinion they don't share, and starting to focus on how they're going to respond, how they're going to combat or debate that viewpoint. Instead, we want them to listen to understand that person's perspective, experience, and why that person feels that way, and getting to that kind of level of empathy and cross-understanding of different experiences. So we kind of reiterate this motto throughout the class.
We're going to go into more detail about the day-to-day offerings of the course and the design of it, but right now we want to go through the setting up of the course. Legacy's taught this course in the past, and this last year was my first time teaching with him. So it was intentional on Legacy's part to find a co-instructor who had different identities and different experiences. So we met on campus, we connected, and we thought this would be a good fit for teaching this course in 2019. And we're going to offer it again in 2020. But it's intentional that we have different experiences, different backgrounds, different stories to share with the students. As Legacy said, this is a January term course, so it's not a traditional fall and spring offering. January term, faculty, staff, community members can apply to teach a January term course. And so we applied in March, it was approved, and we are offering this course with 2 core requirements. So students can take this course to fulfill an American diversity and common good requirement for graduation. We had a TA last year, Sihin, and this year we're going to have 2 TAs coming up. But we interview students who are interested in this topic, who maybe have taken the course in the past, or who are committed to doing this work on campus, so they can support students during the January term. We recruit students on campus by posting flyers. Legacy mentioned that we want to have students who are not graduating in the course because we want them to continue to do this work. So we held 7 spots for first-year students. We had sophomores, juniors, and the seniors who are interested need to come and meet with us in advance about why they're taking this course and how they're going to continue to do this work. We require an info session to be mandatory for all students because we want them to know what this experience is going to be like for them. It will be challenging for many, and we want to know their background coming into this work and their experiences. And so they have an understanding and can ask questions of us about what to expect. We prepare the course during fall semester, and we've been in touch all summer and saving articles and coming up with ideas for January. We set up our course on Google Classroom. So students are logging in every day for articles to submit their assignments. We have events on campus, and students are required to go to 2 events in January. And we have a long list of films for them to watch. So they can select 2 films from the listing, as well as a handful of required and optional articles to read. The required text is Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. It's the 2nd edition, and it's important to note that we use the 2nd edition because there are sample workshops and conversation pieces in the back that aren't in the newest edition. So we use that quite a bit, those back sections and for the workshops for our course. We have a retreat. We'll get into that in a bit, but we do workshop prep for that. We have guest students come and facilitate, and that's, I think, really powerful for students to see their peers or students who are in this course from a year or 2 ago to come back and model what a workshop looks like and talk about their experiences. We also have a daily agenda. So Sihin, Legacy, and I would plan out every day of January the topics, who's going to lead which sections, but knowing that that could change and there might need to be some flexibility, has some flexibility with that agenda. So for example, in January this last year, something came up, I don't remember what, but we had to talk about toxic masculinity. And so Legacy took the lead on that, and we altered our day for that conversation. We have 4 grading components. It's important for students to be engaged every single day and participate. So we have critical questions, we have dialogue every day. They need to contribute to that. We also have readings and daily reflections. So students need to respond to those prompts every day. We have 2 event reflections where they attend an event on campus, sometimes off, but usually on campus, and write a reflection about their experience. As I mentioned, we have a long list of documentaries for them to watch, and they select 2, and they have a final reflection paper to submit at the end of the term. Additionally, we grade them on their facilitation skills, and they have practice facilitations, as well as a final 5-minute oral presentation that they give to us at the end of class. And then towards the end of the term, they have a partner and they create their own social justice workshop. So as we get into it in a minute, we will give them groups and pair them up with team members to create workshops. But this is when they do on their own, and they decide to whom they're going to present this workshop and what the topic will be.
We did get one question on the chat box around would course material be made available. So when we get to the end and we get to our Q&A, Sarah and I put our emails there. Please send us an email if you would like course material. What we did after our NCORE presentation was basically set up a Google Drive where we just put everything in there. We're not shy. We know that this is a field where people need to steal from each other and share ideas. So you will get everything that you want, basically to kind of emulate a similar course or take components of it if you're interested. What I wanted to do at this time is talk a little bit about what our actual weeks look like. So what we put in front of you here is the outline of 1 week, and we'll go through all 4 weeks for last year's term. So that's what those dates are, and kind of giving you a sense of what we do, right? So when we start, this is 2.5 hours every day for these 4 days a week. When we start, we kind of have an introduction day. We talk about the goals of the class, the methods we'll be using. They're doing some introductory reading, kind of getting to know each other, building some rapport, and trying to understand what the class is going to be about. And then we start to talk in the second day about what is social justice in general, what are these types of classes, what are they going to be going through, what are some maybe the challenges of being in that space. Then we're going to move into our 2-day retreat. In a second, Sihin will tell you a little more specifically about what that looks like and how that breaks down. But this is the one thing that Sarah mentioned in the info session. We really try to get students to understand that we need to do this 2-day retreat. Those of you who do social justice work, you understand the need to kind of build a community, build trust before you kind of get to some tougher issues where, you know, that's going to pull at those strings of trust. And so we tell students they're going to have 2 full-day retreats. We provide lunch for those retreats, but it's 8:45 to 5 p.m., which is not, of course, their normal day. And so they know ahead of time in the fall semester they're going to have these 2 days. They need to get off work or out of other activities so they can be there and be present the whole time. That's really important to getting them all up to speed on the same page before we move forward. The next week, we'll do a quick debrief of that retreat, give them some time in groups to kind of get ready for their facilitations. And then we're going to start getting into group facilitations. And then our work as facilitators, as instructors, starts to kind of become less in the classroom and more kind of giving feedback and supporting them. And they're basically doing a lot of the running of the class moving forward and doing facilitations 2 per topic. We always start with ableism. So I'm not sure if other folks have had this experience, but we feel very intentionally that ableism is a topic that a lot of us don't have a ton of knowledge on, different, whether it's a physical disability or a learning disability. It creates empathy in a different way. Everyone can kind of feel empathetic towards someone going through something, and they can really see kind of structural oppression and the ways in which maybe even our campus isn't accessible for students. So an example might be, we ask our students during ableism day, at the end of that day on the way to class the next day, or even leaving that day, to try to make it back to where their residence hall or wherever they're going, and then back to class the next day using only accessible routes. And that'd be a way that we really try to let them see what someone with a different experience than them might go through on a day-to-day basis. And so this kind of further brings our class together. And the way we do that intentionally so that later, when we get to topics like racism and sexism, and there's some natural defensiveness that comes up around people who have privilege in those areas, that they can kind of refer back, and we can talk about, remember in ableism when we try to look at other people's experiences and be empathetic and think about how we can reduce those structures of oppression. And we try to remind them of that because those other topics bring up more defensiveness. So this has always been a great session, and more students are coming out with their learning disabilities and being open about that in that space, and so that's been really helpful. This past year, then we did religious oppression and then sexism. As you're probably thinking at this moment, this moves really fast, and it does. We tell them right away, this is not a class to go in depth and to understand each of these topics, fully. It's a way to introduce you to topics and give you the skills to have these conversations in your normal lives and in other spaces. This past year, the next week, we did heterosexism and trans oppression. It's a little bit of a kind of thrown together day in a way, doing 2 topics, but we just felt like either couldn't be ignored. And at that point, we've gone through 4 facilitations, and now everyone does a second facilitation, and we start with racism. The last 2 years, we've done whiteness. Whiteness is not specifically in the textbook, so we use articles, but we really just felt like there's a difference between talking just about racism, talking about whiteness and that impact, as you'll see today in the workshop that our students are going to present. And then we talked about immigration. And during our final week, we finished with classism as our last topic. And then we've added this World Cafe Day. Many people in higher ed might have done a World Cafe activity. It's in a space where students can move around, dialogue on different tables on different topics that they want to talk about, and do some reflection about their experience in the class, what they learned, what challenged them, and also action steps they might want to take moving forward. We finished the class with 2 closing days. The first, we talk about being an ally, and we start about half of our final presentations. Those are the 5-minute oral presentations that Sarah mentioned. And then we finish with final presentations and some closing activities to remind people of the importance of kind of doing this work moving forward and the community they've built together that hopefully they can continue to keep on campus.
Yeah, so taking it back to code, as Legacy and Sarah had mentioned, code is a 2-day on-campus retreat, and it is in the first week of class. So that Thursday and Friday, students are immersed in what the class is about. So in the beginning, we start by establishing community. We want to have them establish some community guidelines for themselves, which they come up with and are able to refer back to for the remainder of the course, which is pretty cool. We also do some icebreakers during that time, team building. And then in addition to establishing community, code is also important for introducing course terminology. So all of the students come from very different backgrounds, and it was important for us to have them have some common knowledge on terms such as diversity and inclusion, perceptual filters, cycles of oppression, what are they, microaggressions, and yeah, we just wanted them to have a solid base from which we could all build upon. Another thing we had offered to the students was a Facilitator Toolkit. And this was tools and skills that they could use to handle maybe difficult moments in their facilitation, handling silence, talking about what their potential triggers might be in conversation or in difficult dialogue while they're facilitating, and also talking about what is the difference between dialogue and debate, referring back to our motto, which is listen to understand, not to respond. And then finally, there was some time to plan their workshops or their facilitations. We use those two words interchangeably. So their workshops, each student will do 2 of them throughout the course. And at Code, they had some time to meet with those groups that we assigned them to and start planning what they might want to do for those facilitations and when they might want to meet up for that. On a day-to-day basis, a regular day would be students would come to class, and the night before they would have already completed their reflection, which is like a journaling activity where they talk about, or write about the reading that they completed for that night, or the reading that they completed for the next day, and then also they talk about what was that day like, what did they think, what were some takeaways for them. And that is important because we understand that not everyone is maybe going to be the most vocal in class in the first week, or maybe they need some time to, or they need space to be able to write that down, have an alternative way to communicate what they're learning with us. And then also after they do their reflection journals, they come in that day, we're going to do a check-in and review what they wrote about in their journals the previous night, and then also what was the reading for that day. And then finally, we're going to go into 2 workshops, 2 facilitations, which are half an hour each, and they're interactive. So at that point, us as the co-instructor, or me as a TA and the co-instructors, we would be just watching the students leading a facilitation for their peers. And then after the facilitation the facilitations are complete, their classmates would be able to give feedback to the students who'd given the facilitation. So they could give them verbal feedback, and then we would provide our feedback as well. One of the things that we as facilitator, or as co-instructors and TA, would give feedback on is called penny words. So penny words are words that we commonly think of as filler words, words that might distract from the flow of your conversation or your presentation. And we would give them pennies at the beginning of the course. And for every penny word that they said during their facilitation, we would take one away from them. And at the end of the course, the person who had the most pennies left would win. Bragging rights is what they won. And yeah, at the end of class, we would have a wrap up and a review of the day's topic. And we would have a closing circle question. And that would typically relate to the topic of the day and would allow people to go deeper if they didn't have time during the facilitation on facets of the facilitation that interested them.
We wanted to quickly share an email that I received actually on the Super Bowl on February 3rd last year from a faculty member. And the only reason we're sharing this separate from our assessment is just wanted to give you a sense of the potential impact of a course like this and the way in which someone else might notice that impact. So I was at home, I was with my family watching the Super Bowl, and I just kind of checked my phone. I see this email from a faculty member. And the faculty member is talking about a certain student in our class. And the faculty member is an advisor for the students who was meeting with them directly after the end of our final class for an advising appointment. As you can see in some of the highlighted words here, that student was overcome with emotion and really recognized in certain, that she was being kind of recognized in certain ways and being seen in a way that she hadn't felt on campus before. She was thinking about her place as a Black woman on our campus, and as you know by our demographics, that's a pretty small percentage of the students here. And she was finding the courage to kind of use that language and kind of express herself. This faculty member expressed that they thought our course was obviously a catalyst for positive change and growth in the student. They felt privileged to bear witness to that, and they just wanted to share the effect that this course had on this student and probably many others. And so this was just a really awesome moment for us. It was totally unprompted. I actually don't even know this faculty member, and they just sent me this email based on this one experience. So moments like this make you realize you're having an impact in some way. At this point, we'd like to move through and talk a little bit about our own reflections on the course impact, strengths, challenges. We'll start with the co-instructors, move to the TA, and then to our 2 students. So I'll start. I just want to say that I've taught several of these classes, and while they're always really exciting, they're very different. We set up the class very similarly from our perspective, but the students come in with their different backgrounds, experiences, levels of knowledge, and there aren't really requirements for why you need to take this class. And in that way, it's kind of exciting that they can bring different things to the course. So we really never know what to expect. We don't know if we're going to have students really on board or really students challenging us from the beginning or how they're going to feel about their peers. Many students are told to take this by someone who's taken it in the past, but some people take it just for the core requirements, and that's fine as well. And so we really have a breadth of students, a range of students who take this class, and that creates that exciting kind of dialogue that we want. I would say my strengths myself in teaching this class, when I was originally hired as assistant director before my current role as the director, my job was to facilitate students doing intergroup work in first-year residence halls. And so I was basically teaching students to do facilitations the same way this class is. So it aligned very much with my strengths. And I think also I do have the ability to be in spaces, and even though it's very difficult, and I'll talk about that in a second, to not interrupt and engage when a facilitation is happening, I think I have a good ability to do that and see it for what it is and the learning that's happening even in challenging moments. I think the more challenging part for me is trying to remove your own bias. We always acknowledge our biases at the beginning of the class, but we talk about how this isn't a political course. We're not here to choose political sides. We're here to talk about systems and structures. And once people identify something they think is unfair, they can decide what they want to do with that. And if they want to vote a certain way or do something in their life to change policy or make the world better for those people. And so I try to remove my own bias, but that is very difficult. And I taught this class the first time during the inauguration year of Donald Trump. And we had students in the course with MAGA hats and students of color who were very upset at his election. And they were in the course together. So that was a really challenging time to teach the class, but we also had a lot of fruitful dialogue. I think for the students of different identities in the class, it's a different experience. So white students obviously sometimes come in a little apprehensive, but I think they realize pretty quickly that because we're going to talk about different identities, most likely they're going to find privilege and marginalized identities, spaces where they can express different sides of themselves, and they won't always feel like they're being made to feel guilty. And yet they'll have to own those spaces where they have privilege. So it's challenging for white students for sure, but I've thought that many white students have had a lot of growth in this class, and I've been proud of that. Male students are really hard on our campus to get to do social justice work, so it's exciting to see them in this space. And I think they, similar to white students, have that same kind of front up initially, and then once they're able to express their kind of multiplicity of identities, the intersection of their identities, they get more engaged and more willing to be open to their privilege as well. And students of color, I think, to be honest, are probably the students who sometimes are the most frustrated in this class. One, because it seems like a lot of students don't understand their experiences, even though they've probably voiced them before. And two, because I think when they're forced to talk about their own privileged identities, it sometimes gets in the way of them trying to express some of the marginalization they've been feeling on our campus. And so we try to hold both spaces for them, but sometimes that can be frustrating for them as well. I would say the most difficult facilitation to observe and not interrupt is definitely during sexism. We often have students who come out around sexual assault that's happened to them not only in their previous lives, but here on campus, sometime within the last few months. And that's very hard to hear. And what we have to do is, we are going to definitely deal with that as a community once we move past. But in that moment, we want to actually let them and the facilitators have a chance to kind of deal with that group and facilitate for themselves and intervene or not. And so we have to sit there and kind of watch that for a little while. And that can be really difficult to watch students maybe cry and run out of the classroom and trust other students to deal with it in the right way. But there's a lot of learning that happens. I would say my favorite moments are the aha moments when someone suddenly says, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I always had that privilege and now I want to do something about it. Or the times when people tell me after the class, maybe years later, this has had a huge impact on my life. And I really love that. We definitely have seen it campus impact in terms of students recruiting other students to take the class, recruiting students saying, yeah, everyone should take this. And also a lot of students end up working for me in the Intercultural Center. I get a lot of my staff, at least some of them, from this class every year. And I love that. They become more involved in campus and being leaders, not always with us, but sometime with us or in other spaces.
Yeah, and for me, this was my first time teaching this course. I was naturally excited to teach this and to collaborate with Legacy. I guess I had some fears around this just because Corliss left such a legacy and I wanted to respect and honor her and what she created. So I felt that pressure to do really well. Also, this is an add-on to my job. So I have a full-time day job here working in the field of community engagement, and I have a family, and then now I'm teaching on top of that. So I was afraid not of the content, but could I have the capacity to do all this work? With the female students, I think I really identified with them. I think they were really open and connected with me. I was really vulnerable and open with them, especially on the day around sexism. So I think that was an intense day, like Legacy said. And so I think I bonded with some of them in ways that I didn't quite anticipate going into this course. Students with disabilities, with invisible disabilities especially, students were open for the first time, many of them. And like, I have a disability, I've never disclosed this to anyone. This is what my experience is like. These are the resources I have. These are my challenges. So that was really nice to see as an educator that they were able to find the vocabulary and comfort level to share that with others. We have students who are out as gay and lesbian students or bisexual students, and some students had never disclosed at all to anyone, and they were coming out to Legacy and Sihin and me in their journals. And so they're saying, like, this is my experience as a gay man moving through the world, but don't tell my classmates, like, this is what's happening with me. So it was, for me as an educator, it was a special moment that they trusted us enough to talk about their experiences as they move through the world. I think having Sihin there was awesome because it's so important to have that peer experience, that fellow student in the class. The students could turn to her in ways they maybe couldn't talk to Legacy or me. And it was just nice to have another peer in the room as the students worked through these difficult conversations. And there was some resistance, I would say, at the info session, at the beginning of class. Not all students were completely on board with talking about isms and their own identities and intersectionalities. And as we went through day after day and had these difficult conversations, and there were tears and there were frustrations and there was pushback, by the end of the term, pretty much all the students wanted to make this a course requirement for graduation. They all wanted this to be a required course for students. They saw how meaningful this was, how important this was to their development, and they wanted other students to experience this as well.
Yeah, so I can also touch a little bit on my experience being the TA. In most of the years the class has been offered, I believe the TA is someone who might have taken the course, and so they have experience and knowledge of what this process is like. While I had not taken the course, I did have a lot of experience learning how to facilitate and learning how to facilitate difficult conversations and difficult dialogue, as I worked at the Intercultural Center prior to becoming TA. And in my role there, I learned a lot of skills that are very relevant to this course. I learned how to plan facilitations, how to ask probing questions, how to handle triggering topics, perhaps. And I think it was a benefit for me to be a peer of the students in the class, also because they could see me role modeling skills of facilitation and also see the areas where I could improve and start to think critically about, okay, what are the skills that I can take from this and where can I improve on my own? This might be some students' first experience facilitating, and so seeing that role modeled in someone that they can come to with questions, I think might have been a powerful part of the course. Also, we did talk about, the co-instructors and I, about wielding my own identities for the gain of the class. I am a Black woman, I'm bisexual as well. I am a child of immigrants as well, and so I hoped that I would be able to be relatable to some of the students in the class. And then also, I wanted to wield the privileges that I have to show others that, yeah, it is okay to be aware. Actually, it's encouraged to be aware of one's own privileges and to examine, own those, and I hope I was able to show that as well throughout the course. As this was my first time being TA of any kind, I did have some fears around being able to be vulnerable, but also be authoritative. A lot of my classmates were similar in age or the same age or a little younger than me, so I wanted them to, be able to take the knowledge that I had to offer, and I wanted them to take me seriously in that regard, but also I wanted to open up and be that person that they could turn to and share things that might be difficult for them to share with the class or their other peers. Something that surprised me during this course, I I was very excited to be the TA for this course because of the content, but I wasn't anticipating how connected and invested I would be in the students' growth, and how proud I'd be by the end of the course of how much work that they've done and how much they've changed. For example, on the last day, all the students had to give a 5-minute presentation on what they've gathered from the course and what they're taking with them. And a student who in the first maybe week had spoken, it felt like they'd spoken maybe 2 words that whole time, at the end was giving us a 5-minute presentation that moved me to tears almost. And yeah, it was a tear or two that fell. And just seeing how that student was able to open up about exploring their own racial identities and sexism and things that they never thought about before, it showed me the power of our work, and that was a really exciting moment for me. So in sum, another key part was this class, I think this is unique to this class, created a group chat, and that kind of shows the bonding that they had gone through. And after the course ended, one of the students was talking about gathering all the students to do a group beach cleanup day, and there were many different cultural events that they talked about going to together, and that kind of showed me, wow, like this is continuing on past just the course. This has changed and become a way of life for many of our students. So it just taught me that change can happen so quickly. Solid skills and dialogue can be developed. We can learn so much about our own identities and others through exploration, and community can bloom all in the span of 1 month. So this course gave me hope for the future, that there are students out there willing to learn about their own stake in an equitable future. And as long as that is the case, there are people who will work towards it.
Okay, so Angela and I are going to ask each other questions as we move through this slide. So Angela, I'm curious, what were some things that you were both excited and nervous about going into the course?
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Sihin. Something I was really excited about was taking an upper division course. So I was a first year going into this course. I was 18 years old, barely turned 18. And so I knew going into it that I was one of the youngest people in the room. For my year, there was only 4 first years, and I was very scared. That was one of my biggest fears, actually, knowing that I was the youngest person in the room. But trusting my ability and what I knew and my knowledge and my identity and what I knew made me very excited. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get I'm gonna get an upper division course down my first year. Like, what a flex for me. So I was really excited. I was excited to meet a lot of people around campus. I was, in a very small circle, and this really opened my avenue of communicating with the older upperclassmen and hearing from them and having them reach out to me and be like, oh, I heard you want to do this. Here's a resource. And so really getting to network, I was really excited for that networking aspect. But yeah.
So I heard you touch upon the fact that you were an underclassman taking an upper division. Can you touch briefly upon the pace and the rigor of the course and how you experienced that?
Yes, definitely. So every single night we had journals due. These journals were 2 to 3 pages of just reflection of what happened in the class and what we were reading about that was going to be presented in the following class. It was very fast paced. I think something, one of my fears tying in with the pace and the rigor is that I wasn't going to give enough time to each ism and be able to dedicate the time that I think each of them deserves, because they're all very important and there's something to learn from everything. And that was my biggest fear in terms of the pacing. But I thought that the teachers being the student aspect really changed everything for me, and that really facilitated the pace because we were all working at our own paces, and we were telling others, like, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to explain ableism, this is how we see it. So starting off really strong and bonding over that at the beginning really set the course up for a very smooth ride towards, and it really facilitated the rigor of the course.
Yeah. And as we've heard Legacy say already, ableism was the first topic that we had covered, and you've talked about it as well. How about the other isms? Did you have any significant challenges or successes with them? And how did you had they sit with you? How did you experience them? All of that.
Okay, so for exploring isms, there's always isms we come in that we're very comfortable with. I think for me, I was very comfortable in knowing I was Mexican American, I'm first generation, I am low income. I'm very comfortable in those identities, but it's how do I express those and be respectful of others and understand that they might not understand where I'm coming from with my experience and my lived experience because they don't have those lived experiences. And that's what prompted me to take this class. The class that the section that I took the most from was heterosexism and how it presents, because it's something I don't think about on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that affects someone else. And that's where we incorporate the dialogue between one another and really understanding that. I was actually facilitating that conversation, and it was really eye-opening for me because it wasn't white and black or black and white. It was so much more and more in depth, and having students, you know, tell us like, this is my experience. And it really put me in a position where like, I'm very privileged. You know, this is one of my privileged identities where I don't have to disclose this, right? And so that really enhanced my comfort level. We also did classism. That was one of mine, and I'm very comfortable in my class. I grew up in a school where we were all from a similar socioeconomic background, and that was very different coming here to St. Mary's. And that was really scary for me because I was like, I don't know if we can relate on the same topic and the same level, but having this class really gave me the tools to facilitate those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And so you're speaking heavily about the class. Now, we both got the chance to present at NCORE, and we're getting the chance to present here again on the NCORE webinar. I'm curious to hear about your experience at presenting at NCORE and being in that space as an undergrad student. Did you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I would love to. NCORE was amazing. I think I took so much from it. There was, you know, obviously a lot of social aspects, but what set the tone was the first 2 days. I decided to take the institute, and it was decolonizing pedagogy. So I want to be a teacher, and that class, we were facilitating the conversations around it too. So I was like, this is what we've been doing all January. Like, this is what we did all Jan term, and it never clicked with me. Like, this is what decolonizing pedagogy is. And I had the expectation that the teachers were there to teach us, and they were there really to facilitate. It was the most learning we did was from each other and one another and engaging in that dialogue. And so being at NCORE really kind of opened my eyes to that. And I was like, wow, like, we've been doing this. We were set up to do this all of January. Like, this is what decolonizing pedagogy is. And, you know, as I move forward, that's, you know, the next point. As I move forward, that's something I want to implement as a teacher. I want to be a teacher, a history teacher. So this class was definitely very beneficial for me in all aspects and exploring my privileged identities and minoritized identities. So moving forward, I'm going to start implementing this in the summer courses that sometimes I teach over the summer with a community similar to myself.
Yeah.
So,
Before you speak, Rachel, I just want to interject and let everyone on our team know that we're kind of less than 20 minutes left. Do you want to share some of your thoughts there, and then we'll move on into your presentation?
Yeah, for sure. So briefly, I am a transfer student. I'm a senior at St. Mary's. I transferred from a school called Chabot College, which was, it's in Hayward, California, which is super diverse. We had these conversations quite often, but we had them in a more like social realm. It wasn't necessarily in a facilitated, very structured classroom. So moving into this course was extremely just slightly overwhelming, just having it be so structured in a sense. But I do believe that my experiences at Chabot really set me up to be successful in this course. Some significant things that I took from the course were the power of vulnerability. And also with that, we talked about brave space extensively. Brave space is so important, and vulnerability goes hand in hand with that, because we can really learn from each other in this space about the systems of oppression and how they really perpetuate individuals differently, depending upon their experience. And so just inviting the students and having them able to give their experiences and to hear them out, that I think was one of the biggest takeaways for me from the course. Also, self-care in this class is extremely important. Making sure that we're taking care of ourselves while we're having these very difficult conversations, whether that's leaving the room if you're uncomfortable or if something's triggering, or engaging in extra dialogue after class with your classmates to really debrief and unpack the information, or going home. Something that I would do was I would journal at night and just say, like, how did this information sit with me? Who am I in regard to this information? And then come back to class excited and ready to go. And just making sure that you're present, and you're present in that moment, and you're available for your peers, because as Angela has said, we learn the best from each other, and we essentially learn the most from each other as well. And also, I want to briefly touch upon my experience at NCORE. I had attended the White Caucus meetings, which I appreciated greatly because this was a space for the first time where I looked around and saw, yes, all white people in a room, but aside from that commonality, all white people in a room that had the similar goal and our purpose in that space. And our purpose in that space was to unpack our privilege and brainstorm ways that we could deconstruct the systems of oppression utilizing our unearned privilege. And so the actual NCORE, the event in Portland, was absolutely phenomenal, and I'm very excited and very grateful that I had the opportunity, but that I'm here as well with y'all. And what's next for me? So I will be TAing this upcoming Jan term class, so I'm very excited about that. Very excited I have some really big shoes to fill. Thank you, Sihin. But very excited to share my knowledge and continue learning, because this process is never going to stop. Never will this be over. The growing will continue, the learning will continue. And also just moving through the space and moving through St. Mary's, knowing yes, I am white, cisgendered, heterosexual, middle class, able-bodied, female, educated at that, and having all of these identities and moving through this space with that, but also being aware of my privilege in those different spaces. And so in the future, I think that this class has set me up greatly for the work that I'm looking to do and the work that I'll do as a TA moving forward. So very excited for that, and thank you for listening.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited that you all got to hear from our TA and our students about their experiences. I think that's the most important part. I just want to remind our students as they go into their little mini sample presentation that we are a little short on time, just so for the intro stuff, you can move through it pretty quickly and focus more on your activity. And so now you're going to see an abbreviated version, a webinar style version of what would be normally a 30-minute, very interactive workshop in the classroom that would be created with some help from the textbook in terms of modules, but basically created by the students in their group or to the assigned topic or ism that we had given them, right? So that's what you're going to start to witness now.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody again. My name is Rachel Fuller. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a fourth-year psychology major here at St. Mary's. My ethnicity is Italian, French, Irish, and English, and my race is white.
Hello all, my name is Anka Rascon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a second year here at St. Mary's. I do not identify as anything or most options available on documents, as there is no, Mexican or Latinx. The rare chance that there is Latinx or Hispanic, that is what I would fill in, and I ethnically identify as Mexican American. My parents are Mexican, I was born here. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started with our agenda today. On our agenda, we have the learning objectives, brave space guidelines, microaggressions, key terms, activity, dialogue, conclusion and action steps, and lastly, our references.
So our learning goals and objectives for today are to facilitate a conversation about whiteness, create an opportunity for dialogue that will allow participants to understand the experiences of different racial groups, to develop a shared understanding of whiteness, and to examine the social and cultural privileges and advantages that come with whiteness.
So before we go ahead and get started, whiteness is a very difficult topic that we will be unpacking, so we'd like to set up some brave space guidelines. The first one being controversy with civility. I want to remind everyone that we are in a brave space. This is a place where we should all feel safe expressing our opinions. We're all here to learn and understand with one another. With that being said, the first one is controversy with civility. It's an alternative to agree to disagree. We will not be ending the conversation when we disagree, more so strive to understand others' perspective, so push past the disagreement. So the second would be own your intentions and your impact. So, which is to recognize that our intentions and our actions are not always congruent with our impact on others, and we should take responsibility for our impact, challenge by choice. So whatever we put out into the class and into this workshop, we will be getting back. No attack, so we don't aim to attack, rather we look to challenge beliefs. Respect each other, so respect and consider how to challenge others' views by doing so respectfully.
We will now talk about microaggressions. So a microaggression is a term used for brief and commonplace verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudice, slights, and insults towards any group. When we learned about this in class, actually, Sihin had given our class a quote or a way to think about microaggressions, which sticks with me to this day, which is death by 1,000 slights. And so microaggressions are these everyday things that we don't really think about until it's, put to our attention.
So some examples of microaggressions related to whiteness are, where are you from? Where are you really from? Emphasis on the really. Can I touch your hair? Where were you born? You speak English so well. You are very articulate. Actions can be talking slowly to a person of color and walking by a person of color and clutching one's purse. So we're going to start off with our key terms, one of them being whiteness. So the meaning of whiteness is historical and has shifted over time. Example, Irish, Italian, Spanish, Greek, and Southern European peoples have at times been raised as non-white. Whiteness is a state of unconsciousness. Whiteness is often invisible to people, and this perpetuates a lack of knowledge or understanding of difference, which is a root cause of oppression.
Moving into our second set of key terms, we have white privilege. This is a right, advantage, or immunity granted to and enjoyed by peoples of European descent beyond the common advantage of all others. This encompasses economic, political, social, and cultural structural actions and beliefs that systemize and perpetuate an undistribution of privileges, resources, and power between white people and people of color. So at this time, we're going to be moving into our activity. So the purpose of this activity we want to highlight briefly is to acknowledge white privilege and the nuanced ways that it might play out in day-to-day life. We are highlighting these concepts to begin the conversation of unpacking white privilege and to recognize its presence.
The way this activity will work is we will be saying a statement and we will be asking you all to click on your button. It says click raise hand, and we will be asking everyone who the statement applies to please raise their hand. And then after we read the prompt, we'll ask it twice, and then we will come back and tell you to please click the lower hand button or just unclick the raise your hand button after the statement has passed, and we will continue doing that for 3 examples. So we're going to go ahead and get started with please click if you are unable to easily find band-aids that match the color of your skin. So if everyone could just go ahead and click on raise hand. Okay, so once again, you are unable to easily find band-aids that match the color of your skin. Go ahead and click that. Raise hand. Okay, please unclick.
Okay, please raise your hand if most classroom textbooks and other materials regularly reflect your race as normal and also depict people of your race as the heroes and builders of the United States. Okay, you may unclick.
Okay, please click if you are often the only person of your race in a classroom or public space. Go ahead and unclick.
And finally, please click if you don't need to think about race or racism every day. Please click if you choose when and where you want to respond to racism. At this time, you can unclick.
We will now be going into an individual reflection or small group discussion. So ideally how this would work in class is we have these questions on the board and we would go through each of them and think about them for a minute and then perhaps discuss with the person next to us. But for the sake of this, we're gonna go ahead and use the chat box. And so if any of these statements apply to you, please feel free to share your experience and how you felt doing the activity. So the statements go as follow. What statements made you think about something new or in a different way?
In what ways was white privilege highlighted in this activity?
And how does whiteness and white privilege negatively impact the experiences of people of color?
Okay, so take about 2 minutes in the chat. Answer these questions. If you're with a group of people and watching this, you may answer in the small group that you're with. And yeah, we'll come back in 2 minutes and we'll see what y'all are saying. So we're seeing in the chat briefly that folks are asking to re-see the statements. So I'm just going to read through them briefly to just remind you of what they were. So the first one is, you are unable to easily find Band-Aids that match the color of your skin. Second, most classroom textbooks and other materials regularly reflect your race as normal and also depict people of your race as the heroes and builders of the United States. Third, you are often the only person of your race in a classroom or office space. And finally, you don't need to think about race or racism every day. You can choose when and where you would like to respond to racism.
We're seeing a lot of comments in regard to seeing when to acknowledge race. And as a person of color, that's something that is always on my mind when I walk into a room. Like, will I be the only person of color? Will I be the token Latina in the room? And so I very much resonate with all of you who are, using the chat box to express that.
Also, I saw a comment about emojis and how you're able to choose the color of your emoji person, and I think that that's really great, and I want to thank you for highlighting that idea, because I think that that does go hand in hand with the Band-Aid statement.
We would like to thank all of you for using the chat box. We are now going to move on to the next portion, or the last portion. So
we will at this point be moving into our action steps. So in the following slides and statements, we will be highlighting the importance of acknowledging white privilege. Through this, we will specifically be encouraging our white participants to consider how they both move through the world and occupy space. Peggy McIntosh says in Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, describing white privilege makes one newly accountable. One who writes about having white privilege must ask, having described it, what can I do to lessen or end it?
Okay. With that being said, thank you, Rachel. We're going to go into the additional action steps. So consider how your whiteness could be weaponized against people of color.
Use your privilege to be on the front line between people of color at police protests. You're at much less risk than them.
So understand that nothing in your life has been untouched by your whiteness. Everything you have would have been harder to come by if you had not been born white.
Remember that your queerness, womanhood, class background, or disability does not exclude you from white privilege.
It's important to recognize that facing your whiteness isn't about you or your feelings. It's about liberating people of color from a world that tries to crush them at every turn.
And remember, being an ally is a verb, not a noun. You can't just magically be an ally to people of color because you say you're one. It's something that you must continuously work on every day. And to conclude our activity, our final action step that we would like y'all to stick with and think about and really hold true to yourself is, what are some things that those of us with unearned privilege can do to promote equal opportunity and racial justice? Thank you.
These are references.
Sihin, thank you, Anna and Rachel. As you all can tell, that was a very abbreviated version of what would be a 30-minute interactive workshop in the classroom. So that would be a lot slower. We'd have time for questions, and that activity, we actually cut it down to 4 questions. I think it was about 8 or 12 in the initial outline. Even in NCORE, I think we did 8. And so the students would be interacting, conversating. That would be a good, 15, 20 minutes of the whole presentation there. Be a lot longer. And unlike many of you probably listening today, for some students in the classroom, they've never thought of these things, right? We have first-year students, we have students from all backgrounds. There's no requisite requirements to be in the class. So those students will be kind of engaging with this and really kind of having critical thinking moments. Once those facilitations end, those 30 minutes, we'll give them applause. What would happen is we would actually ask the facilitators to stand in front of the classroom. We have them each say one thing they did really well during the facilitation and one thing they think they could improve on. We would then ask the class, as a general rule, a couple people to share like 1 or 2 things that you really liked about the facilitation, 1 or 2 constructive feedback. And then the instructors and the TA, we would give all of our feedback, grade them, and we would kind of give them our feedback, what they did really well, areas for improvement. The whole class should be listening so they can improve their next facilitations. And lastly, we would have Sihin do our penny words. And so Sihin would be counting penny words. And I know we got a question about that on the app. So Sihin, do you want to just very briefly tell what are penny words again?
Yeah.
And kind of why do we do that?
Yeah, so penny words are words they're words that we don't often notice that we're saying, that we might throw out when we're thinking or when we're thinking of something to say. And I believe the purpose of penny words is to be more aware of yourself while you're facilitating. And this is a form of awareness that I think can help the overall flow of one's presentation and just being intentional in your words and your word choices. So I hope that clarified what they are. And we, as a class, came up with a list of a bunch of words that could qualify as penny words together, so everyone's aware of what words count as penny words.
Even though we do take pennies, it's not really punitive. There's no real winner. It's really kind of a fun part of the class. The students actually really love it and always talk about it afterward. But we do try to have them slow down so they can kind of think about what they're about to say. And so if they want to lose less pennies, they'll practice slowing down and just being clear in their communication. And we also, in addition, use some inclusive language words, such as we don't say you guys to the whole classroom. And there's some other terms that we might avoid saying to make sure that we're being inclusive of everyone in the classroom. So thank you for that question. We have many other questions we'll get to in the Q&A. I've been taking some notes. But at this point, we want to move forward and talk a little bit about our assessment briefly.
Yeah, so we have 30 students. We had 30 students in our class in 2019, and that's considered a large class on campus. Someone had asked about class sizes, and the typical size is 19 on campus. They're often capped at 24 or 27 students, so we had a large class of 30. We wanted to get an understanding of where students are coming from in terms of their knowledge on isms, on social justice topics and definitions. So we did a pre and post survey of students for the course, and 28 completed both the pre and post survey. So of these 28, 4 were first year students, 4 were second years, 13 were third years, and 7 were fourth years, with 19 being women and 9 being men.
So some of the questions that we asked them, we put them into a graph form. I want to note that the purple bars are from the assessment taken at the start of the course, and the beige bars are from the assessments at the end of the course. So as you can see, we had a question that was, how often do you participate in events about other cultures? And there was a marked rise in the amount of people who said that they always or almost always participate in events about other cultures. It's important to note that we did require, as part of the course, 2 events that they had to attend that were about other cultures, but we're still going to take that rise to include events that were optional for them that they chose to go to. Another important question was, how often do you explore the different parts of your social identity? And there was a lot of people who ended up saying 22 out of 28 of our respondents at the end of the course were able to say that they always or almost always explore the different parts of their social identity. And this was important because this is one of the cruxes of the class, exploring identities and different isms, and then also our own relation to those isms and how we either benefit or don't benefit from those different identities that we hold. So that was an important statistic. And then multicultural competency is important in order to succeed professionally. Almost all of our students agreed by the end of the course that they strongly agreed that multicultural competency is important in order to succeed professionally. And this is good because maybe not everyone could see the purpose or the usefulness of this in their everyday lives, but they were at least able to see where this would be useful for them in their not academic, but career going forward. And then finally, I have examined my own prejudices about people who are different from me. Yeah, as you can tell, 21 out of 28 were able to say that they strongly agree. And I think that this is one of our hopes for the class, that we are giving them tools to help others engage in dialogue and think about their own prejudices, but we also want them to be able to do that for themselves and for their own identities. So that was a really key statistic as well.
We also had some qualitative questions, and we asked students to define inclusion. And through thematic analysis, I was looking at their responses, and in the beginning, in the pre-course survey, they were just all over the place with definitions, but I could kind of cluster some together. So in the pre-course survey, they defined inclusion as accepting of others, part of a group, people participate with differences. And at the end of the course, there were more similar responses. So 10 students said inclusion is making the mix work, respecting all people, having the same opportunities. 9 students said it's recognizing everyone and making certain they're included. A similar prompt for social justice. Again, responses were all over the place, but 12 of them had similar words such as equity and inclusion, or equality, social identity, everyone's respected, relieved from oppression. And at the end of the class, 11 students defined it as a process and a goal, which is what we talked about in class, for equal participation and equitable distribution of resources and being more inclusive. In addition to our post-survey, the college submitted to all students an evaluation at the end of the term, and one of their prompts was, what 3 things did you most value learning in this course? One student, and I highlighted keywords here, one student said, I valued being able to further understand the various identities we each obtain and how the intersectionality of these identities affect each and every one of us differently. I valued being able to hear other perspectives and experiences on certain issues that helped me gain further understanding on what it's like to be associated with certain identities. I value being able to further develop my public speaking and small group skills as well. And then one more prompt, what particular difficulties did you face in your learning? And this one is great for us as educators. The student identified, the biggest difficulty I faced in this class was being okay with discomfort while learning. This process, however, was vital to learning the material we learned. If we weren't uncomfortable, I'm not sure that we would learn as well as we did. This discomfort is called a learning edge, and when you are able to surpass it, you are able to recreate the way you think.
Great. So now we are moving on to the Q&A section. Thank you for sitting through our presentation. There's some questions that I've already seen that we want to maybe quickly address, and then we'll be open to answering some different questions, and different members of our team can do that. I quickly want to just address, we do talk about intersectionality. That's something that comes up. One of the keys of this class is, although we're giving a book and articles to read, we are really allowing them to share their experiences, and students say they love that they can talk about their own personal experiences, not just some lesson from 50 years ago or something, that they can really talk about what they're experiencing day to day. And so we make sure they talk about multiple identities and how they might have both a privileged and a marginalized identity. How does that intersect? How are different intersections different for different people? So we definitely focus on intersectionality. That's pretty big on our campus in general in the social justice work that we do. And then also there was an interesting question around, would this class be different if it was a full term class versus the shortened Jan term class? I think it's a great question. I think it would be a fun class to teach over a semester. I do think it would be slightly different. I think in many ways, the shortness of being able to move quickly adds the kind of the building of a team going through like a journey together aspect, which might be slightly different over kind of a larger period of time where people are missing more class and coming in and out. Of course, you could go a lot deeper into the topics, which I think would satisfy some students, and I think that would be exciting. One of the other unique things about Jan Term is that it allows people like Sarah and myself who are staff members on campus to teach. And so probably if this were a full-term class, it would be taught by faculty. And although I think we have great faculty who could do it, it might be a different experience for the students who are kind of looking at faculty more as experts and are used to that kind of role. And I think with us, they get very comfortable very quickly that we're not experts necessarily. We do this work on campus, but we're here to facilitate them talking to each other and learning from each other. So I think it is unique in Jan Term. I enjoyed the experience, but it could also work, I think, in a slightly different way over a full term. And in that way, we do get full credit, just for that question that someone asked. It's a full credit class, but it's just that one credit they're getting for that one course during Jan Term. And then before we move on to additional questions, Sarah, would you like to address the questions that were raised around mandatory reporting or counseling services?
Yeah, we do refer students to the counseling center here on campus. What happened for us for this term is that when students described their assault or when they brought it up, and for some it had happened in the past, for others they'd already reported it. So we're very much aware of our role on campus and our duty to report. And in these situations, students were sharing what they were comfortable sharing, but many had already either reported it or it happened in the past, and they were just triggered by what was coming up in the conversation.
Yeah. There's a great question here around international students. I'm trying to remember if we had any. Do you remember, Sarah, did we have any last year?
We didn't.
I did have one the year before, and that's always, I think it's interesting on several levels. On the one hand, I think we're pretty straightforward in a lot of the social justice work we do on this campus that oftentimes it is US based because some of these isms look very different in other countries and other cultures. And so usually that's our approach, and we'll be pretty upfront if we're talking about it in a more global way. And so I did have an international student a year ago or 2 years ago in that class. And I do remember him specifically, he would interject anytime he said, oh, that's really interesting, but this looks different where I come from, or that might be read differently in this culture. And so we would just talk about that and how when you're taking this work moving forward, if you're going to go live or work in a different country, how that might look different. But overall, I think that some of those same structural oppression issues were still present, but maybe just not, as high for one as another in a different country. So I enjoyed having an international student in the class and bringing that perspective. But I think if we maybe had, half the class are international students, it might be a little bit distracting from focusing in on like what it's like in the US context. So I think that would be my answer to that question.
Legacy, can you touch on the seniors talking with you about why they're taking this course?
Yeah, so Sarah mentioned this before, but basically the initial makeup of this class was hoping that students would then afterwards be this kind of cohort of trained facilitators that we as staff or faculty at campus could reach out to. And this did happen in the past. Before I ever taught this class, they used to kind of send out a list of proposed like workshops or ways that students could facilitate in the spring. And those students would, kind of be the group they would reach out to. Over time, there wasn't enough kind of opportunities on campus to keep that as a requirement of the course. But we thought that the reasoning behind that, the fact that students should be ideally engaging, whether it's in their student organizations or in leadership roles or doing something on campus to make a difference, we wanted to still have a lot of students who are going to be here, not just for one more semester, but that would continue. And so that's why we still meet with seniors. I really have not rejected a senior, but it's been more of a way to say, listen, this is my expectation of you, and what are you going to do for that last semester? Why is this important to your future career? So, there's that. That's why we still meet with them. And I'm also seeing some questions or some reminders about resources. Our emails are right here. The easiest way for us is if you could just send us, Sarah or I, doesn't matter, or both of us, an email, and we'll add all of you to a Google Doc or Google folder that will have everything from this class that you can probably, more than you probably want. Oh,
You're
hi.
muted. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you were muted.
Oh,
We couldn't hear you.
I think it was our internet, sorry. So there's a question here about, please, would you share an example of how you navigated student pushback? Can you think of an example of that, Sihin?
I am not, nothing is really coming to mind. I think that most of the if we notice students struggling with the topic or maybe not seeming willing to engage with it, we probably would have a conversation with them, maybe like after class, or we would, if something happened maybe in their journals that we might wanted to, talk to them about, because oftentimes when a student is pushing back in class in their journals, it's a different story. They're often more willing to open up about what they think, their true feelings, on things that they wouldn't want to say in class to their peers. And so I think that was a technique, using journals to kind of see where we can help support students and push them on their thinking. And then also in class, we could also just have a casual conversation with them, see where their head's at on certain topics.
Yeah, here's one topic. When we were talking about our privileged identities and other areas where we're target identities. And one student identified as Christian and said she was targeted for being Christian. And we were trying to explain, like, well, in this society, like, that really is a privileged identity. Like, the calendar is based around Christianity. Like, there are all these examples. And she really felt that because of the media right now that she was a target. And so we really had to kind of talk about, like, hear her perspective and kind of talk through this some more with her individually and in journals and groups. That's the first thing that came to mind.
I would also add to that we really try to build a culture in the class that they are creating the space, right? So we do their kind of community guidelines that we always have hung up every day. We refer to them many times. And so sometimes if the student seems like they're struggling in the class or they're frustrated, we'll not only ask them to share, but we will ask the class to, address that issue. So we don't kind of create a space where us as instructors are kind of like telling them this is the way it is. But instead we're saying, what are your all thoughts? Can other people share your perspective? Do you agree or do you disagree? What do you want to share? And I think in that way, the class kind of works itself out a lot. Sometimes in the journals, you'll find out that the student's still frustrated. They didn't feel heard in that space. But I think a lot of times when they're able to have time in the class to speak up and speak to each other, then they end up, saying, okay, I understand. I now hear this perspective. I'm hearing it differently because the student has told me that. I see a great question here that maybe Rachel wants to address around, do you ever have white students really struggle with seeing that they have white privilege? For example, I've heard nobody ever gave me anything. Rachel, do you want to address that?
So yeah, I was one of those students at one point. I was introduced to my whiteness just a few years ago. I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, by a mentor that I had at Chabot College. And I remember him saying, like, we have to talk about your whiteness. And I was like, there's nothing to talk about. And then I found out there was a lot to talk about. So in our specific class, I don't know that we had any of this, any white students really struggling with that. However, I think that is, though, because we covered a lot of topics before whiteness. And so folks had the ability to reflect and see how the material sat with them before they just jumped to, oh, this doesn't apply. Because of the amount of dissection and reflection that we had to do leading up to whiteness, I think that really prepared white students in the class who may have shown resistance to sit back and identify themselves first and really reflect with themselves and see how the material sits, and then jump into the whole thing of, like, unpacking whiteness. But something that I think was really great about our class in particular was there were a lot of people who were informed on their whiteness. And so I think that if there was any pushback from white students, it would have been handled very graciously by the other white students who were, farther along in unpacking their whiteness, I suppose, and helping that process happen.
Rachel, I think that's a great point. Specifically, one of the benefits, and there are some challenges, one of the benefits of having first years through seniors, different kind of levels and backgrounds and knowledge in the room, is that they sometimes just educate each other. A lot of times they'll just answer those questions even if it's kind of asked to us, and they'll say, well, here's what I know, here's what I've learned, I've taken ethnic studies 1 or whatever. And so I think there is a lot of that self-education going on from the peers, which we love, and then kind of reiterates that we're not experts, and that it's really coming from all of our collective knowledge. I also see a great question here around faculty. How are students being received by faculty who may not be on board with diversity and inclusion? Do you have a partnership with faculty? I can answer the second question, and I don't know if anyone else wants to answer their experiences, like one of the students with other faculty. We don't have a direct partnership. Obviously, there's faculty that are involved with the Jan-Term office that, you know, we sign up, that we apply for this course. But what's great about it is that informally, we have many faculty who've just kind of heard about this class. In fact, I had a faculty member this past year who said she wanted to meet with me. I know her not well, and she said, you know, I just keep having students in my seminar class talking about your Jan-Term class. I thought, well, that's great, you know, let's meet. And I met with her, and she said, well, what are you doing? What's magical? Like, what? And I said, you know, it's not really magical what we're doing. We're just kind of creating spaces for students to share their own experiences, not focus on kind of the faculty with all the information, and to collectively go on this journey together where everyone's going to have to be vulnerable at some point. And I think that's just kind of what's special about it, but it's not really magic. And the great thing about this is she's just been so supportive. She's going to help us buying some course books this year, and through her own department. And so we don't really have any extra money for the course. So she's really supportive now. And that's awesome. That came just from her experience with students that have taken the class. But do any of you students have experience with faculty who aren't on board with this kind of topic in terms of you bringing this knowledge?
I think, you know, taking seminar, there's definitely some texts that are very, not racially charged, but there's a lot of issues of racism that a lot of professors will oversee just because they don't know how to have those. So it's not of, you know, directly having those conversations, but it's more just like, let's just avoid that topic. Let's look at the bigger picture. There's another message before that. So let's unpack this. And then next thing you know, the 40 minutes or an hour is up. And so it's just more of a ignoring that, and because they don't have the tools or the facilitator tools to have that conversation.
Also, I'd like to add just the importance of language. I think that if you haven't taken classes as this or any kind of like ethnic studies or any class that highlights intersectionality or social justice or racism or anything like that, I think that the component of inclusive language might not be there. And I think most often I see that on campus than I do like from faculty outward, like racism or anything like that. And it's kind of just like, for me, I had an example where I had a professor talking about disabilities, and I thought that her language wasn't very inclusive. So I stayed after class and I was like, you know, you really don't know who's in your audience. And so you have to think about how you're portraying certain topics and the words that you're using, and you need to be careful with that. And she was very grateful, and she was like, thank you for your feedback. Like, it's really important for students to give feedback. So my experience with professors has been okay so far. And it's just, you know, we're all in this process of learning. And so I think the professors need to be open to learn, but students, we need to be open to help our professors in that as well.
Yeah, I've had like a variety of experiences, both positive and negative, mainly negative. I wouldn't say mainly negative, but I've had a nice mix of experiences with faculty. And I think we mentioned at the beginning of our presentation this thing called BERT, which is a bias reporting tool. And that means that if a student is in a class where they feel a professor is maybe saying things or doing things that are not very inclusive, not very aware, or things that are outright offensive, they can definitely make that report. And what that does is basically alert the school that someone might need some more support on learning about diversity and inclusion. And so I think that St. Mary's is so amazing in so many different ways. I think that a room for growth, area for growth might be having all faculty and faculty learn about these topics. Maybe make this a mandatory course for students and faculty. That's an idea.
So I know we're running out of time, a couple minutes left. I do see a question here around the use of the words ally versus accomplice. Which one is more appropriate and why? They're just asking us our opinion on that. I will say in the class, we do use the term ally. We mainly talk about it right near the end. We also talk about upstander, so kind of being an active bystander. And those are terms that we use. Allies really used on our campus in a lot of different spaces, like our safe zone training. So although I think there's sometimes are better terms. Accomplice, I haven't heard that term that much. I've heard advocate a little bit more than that. So that might be another term that can be used. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think similarly in our office, we use ally more. We've heard interrupter or accomplice, but ally is the common term we use.
I think the main point is just focusing on what Rachel talked about in the workshop, is that ally being a verb and not a noun. And we talk in the class about you don't call yourself an ally. Folks in a group that you're trying to kind of help support should be the ones that identify you as an ally. So that's kind of the way that we would address that topic. Yeah. And I want to make a reminder to some of the folks who typed in before that if you just email us, we will add you to a Google folder and give you everything from our class, basically from last year, and you'll be able to see everything. Sarah and I have even met with one individual from a different college since the NCORE presentation to talk about how she could implement some of these things on their campuses. We know they're very different. It's not as hard for us to teach this class because we are, you know, at a small campus, and also we have this Jan term where staff can teach. But I think it could be a lot more difficult if we were trying to do this during a regular term, or maybe on some campuses where staff don't have those opportunities. Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for participating, for showing up and giving everything, and for the work that you do as well. What I'm going to ask, if you all could email me your presentation, and then all the participants will receive a survey to give your feedback on the presentation, and with that survey we'll send out your PowerPoint presentation. But thank you again. You all did amazing. And we encourage you to go to the website and see what webinars we have available for the month of November and December. Thank you.
Thank you.